Okay, in Avatar, when they have sex on Pandora, they hook up their ponytails. So we know their ponytails are like their junk.
Yeah, so?
So when they ride horses and fly on the birds, they also use their ponytails.
What's your point?
My point is, if I were a horse or a bird, I'd be very nervous around James Cameron.
Is this a horse? Is this a bird? If all life was created, then maybe this is what a cat would look like if it were manufactured by a different company or the gods of a different biosphere. The same people who might say that this is a cat have also told me that this is not a cat. They'll say that this is a horse, but they won't associate this with horses. These same people might say that this is a bird. Even if they call it a pterosaur, they usually say that pterosaurs are dinosaur birds, even though pterosaurs are neither birds nor dinosaurs. Pterosaurs are actually older than dinosaurs. Real birds actually are dinosaurs. But curiously, the very people who think that dinosaurs are lizards and that bats count as birds refuse to accept that this could be a dinosaur or that this could be a bird.
Just find out what the blue monkeys want.
Are these people? Clearly they're not any subset of Homo sapiens, and dictionary definitions generally specify that only human beings can be considered people. But even if that definition were broadened, as it probably should be in this case, these people still wouldn't be human or any other species of monkey. Humans are a subset of apes, so if you're not an ape, then you can't be human. Humans are a subset of mammals, also in the same way and for the same reason. Not every mammal is human, obviously, but every human is a mammal, and if you're not a mammal, then you can't be human, no matter how intelligent or civilized you are.
We have to face the undeniable fact that no matter how much you may be like a human being, you are not part of the human gene pool. You are outside of it entirely. You are something else, something artificial.
Whenever I try to explain to creationists the taxonomic significance of genetic orthologs or comparative morphology, I usually hear comments to the effect that similarity doesn't imply a common ancestor, it's evidence of a common designer. And they very often use the sequential development of automobiles in their claim that any apparent phylogeny is an illusion. But even if we ignore the fact that big cars don't give birth to compact cars and therefore aren't subject to the laws of population genetics, and even if we ignore the fact that animals reproduce naturally without need of assembly from any manufacturer, there are still plenty of indicators to prove that our biology is definitely a product of common ancestry and does not involve any evident designer. For example, Adolf Hitler was an intelligent designer. He conceived what was arguably the most versatile production automobile ever made. He called it the people car. They were intended to be economical, fuel-efficient, and lightweight. They could even drive on water. They really could, especially if after being modified. The classic VWs could easily be converted into Baja bugs, dune buggies, sandrails, all manner of custom kit cars, and even ultralight aircraft, because it was a very simple design. It ran leaded gasoline through a carbureted, rear-mounted, air-cooled aluminum engine in a popper configuration with a standard stick-shift transaxle for rear-wheel drive. That was the original Beetle. This is also a Volkswagen Beetle, but it has a front-mounted, water-cooled, unleaded, fuel-injected nickel and steel alloy engine in the inline configuration and has an automatic transmission for front-wheel drive. The Beetle changed very little over nearly 40 years. Then it was discontinued for a couple of decades and brought back completely different. These are both products of the same designer, Volkswagen, not Hitler, yet the only thing they have in common is that dumb-looking bubble-shaped body style. So they only resemble each other superficially. They share brand names, but otherwise aren't even related. This is why we don't say that cars evolve. Through a process of trial and error, a creator can improve his designs, of course, and usually will, a little or a lot, especially as new technology becomes available or he gets a better idea of what he's doing. But he can also arbitrarily decide to scrap all that and reinvent the original model again, but still change everything inside. A creator can choose to create things however he wants, especially if he uses magic powers instead of natural processes, because then there are no rules applied. But evolution could never produce the kinds of changes we see in cars, because it's just a matter of population genetics and is therefore restricted by the laws of physics and phylogeny. Despite what you may have seen in the movies or on TV, evolution never permits one thing to turn into another completely different thing. You can't have a whole suite of functional mutations occur all at once, as if choreographed to achieve a certain goal. Nature acts without intent. Usually only one thing changes at a time, and that trait may be carried on to subsequent branches, each of whom develop their own unique modifications of the parent template, and that trait marks the next morphological distinction and the subsequent clades. And on it goes, incrementally, indefinitely, with a new branch division at every node. That's what I mean when I say that systematic taxonomy reveals a series of superficial changes being slowly compiled atop compounded tiers of substratal similarities. This is what we consistently see in nature and in the fossil record, and it's not just evidence of a single universal common ancestor, but a detailed genealogy of myriad common ancestors at many different levels. This is certainly not what we should expect to see from a common designer, because what you usually get from a creator are things that don't fit into any cladogram. If cars evolved, then we could classify them according to a hierarchy of derived traits, in which case the Chevy Corvair would not be more closely related to Corvettes and Camaros than to the Beetle and Carmen Ghia. But a creator can change the whole design at any time, or any one model might be equipped with different engines, transmissions, or other options which could be swapped with other models too. Multiple creators can steal each other's designs without any ancestral linkage, such that motorcycle manufacturers can suddenly start building cars, and car companies can decide to design motorcycles, and everyone can build their own SUV. Again, this sort of thing is impossible in an evolutionary scheme, because if all life forms evolve at all, then every living thing has to fit a cladogram of cousins and common ancestors, and the implied relationships we describe have to be verifiably accurate according to a suite of specific criteria required in each case. But a magical creator can conjure anything he wants for any reason or none, and these would consequently defy classification. For example, on Star Trek you have humans, Vulcans, Romulans, and Klingons, all based on the same template, but with each subset bearing its own distinctive modifications, like weird ears or funky foreheads and definitive behavioral disorders. They're all essentially the same thing, and the fact that they can all interbreed would be another indication that they should all be closely related subspecies, at least within the same genus, and all derived from the same source. But if they're supposed to be separate species that originated unrelated, each on distant planets, then even their fundamental biology would be dramatically different.
It's that green blood of his. My hemoglobin is based on copper, not iron.
Both working.
What do you mean both?
Well, he's got two hearts.
Oh, don't be stupid.
He has.
Anything else he's got two of?
Leave him alone.
They can't all be uniquely original but superficially identical, internally incomparable, and genetically compatible all at the same time. In our biological reality, there can be convergence where members of once divergent subclasses later play identical roles and adapt accordingly. But they'll never become the same and can never hybridize. It doesn't matter how much they look alike on the outside, because the physiology of the organism determines what it is. The more distantly related they are, the deeper you'll have to look for similarities, but if they're related at all, then the deeper you look, the more similar they'll be. Pointed ears and monomorphism are both possible in a human subspecies because they're both variations of the same template, meaning the core of their being is essentially the same. But if we're talking about science fiction and fantasy stories, then we're talking about created things, so their relationships don't even have to make sense. And that's exactly the sort of thing creationists demand, impossible oddities which evolution could never produce. If we discover some previously unknown life form, we can add its branch to the tree of life, but only when we can trace its evolution such that the tree itself already shows where that organism belongs. Systematic taxonomy cannot accommodate created chimeras like a vertebrate hexapod or a mammal with feathers. It is possible for chickens to have scales and for some mammals to still have scales because both are derived from a form previously referred to as reptiles. But it is impossible for a mammal to have feathers, nor to simply turn on any gene that can produce feathers. Mutations can produce scales that at a glance may look like feathers, but not actually be feathers, because feathers aren't like hairs or scales. They're a highly complex construct which evidently developed in a series of sequential stages represented by several successive species. It would be a statistical impossibility for an exact duplicate of that level of complexity to coincidentally emerge again in mammals. So the typical depiction of angels and the flying monkeys from The Wizard of Oz would both destroy the phylogeny currently attributed to evolution, because evolution can't account for primates with 2 arms, 2 legs, and 2 other limbs, but certainly not if they're fully avian wings. That's why I say that God could make anything he wants, any way he wants. But if we ever found a real live Pegasus, that would immediately reduce evolution to horse feathers. Because we're not just talking about feathers, but the structure beneath. There is no evolutionary process capable of developing a 3rd pair of limbs onto a skeleton incapable of accommodating another set, and of a type that cannot be formed by any evolutionary process. Mixing animals is common in mythology. Most created creatures are that way. But evolution cannot account for the arms of a dinosaur growing out of the body of a horse, nor any other mammal either. It simply cannot happen naturally. So if we ever found such a thing, it would mean that evolution is significantly flawed, in that life forms really are being created by some other means.